After years of being the family fixer, they told me I wasn't part of them at their anniversary dinner. I was just the babysitter. So I disappeared without a word, leaving them to face Hawaii without me. Their perfect family crumbled while I found myself. I stood in the kitchen, apron smeared with grease, flipping burgers on the grill while the house buzzed around me. My parents' 40th anniversary party was in full swing. 40 years of Thomas and Margaret celebrated with a backyard packed full of family. My hands moved fast, keeping the food coming while my siblings Jackson, Grace, and Lily lounged at the picnic table, laughing with their spouses and letting their kids run wild. I'd been at it since morning, setting up chairs, stringing lights, chasing after my nieces who thought the cake was a playground. At 32, I was the eldest, the one who made things work, always had been. The noise hit a peak when Dad clinked his beer bottle with a fork, standing up like some king about to decree something. Mom leaned against him, her grin wide, and the crowd hushed. "We've got an announcement," he said, voice gravelly from years of barking orders. "Next week, we're taking the whole family to Hawaii. Another party, but with sand and sun." Cheers erupted. Jackson hooted, Grace clapped, and the kids shrieked about surfing. I felt a jolt of excitement, too. Hawaii sounded like a dream, a break from the grind. I flipped the last burger, wiped my hands, and stepped closer. "Well, what time's the departure?" I asked casually, figuring I'd need to shuffle some work shifts. Dad turned, his gray eyes narrowing like I'd asked something stupid. "You don't need to know," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're not part of us. Stay here and watch the kids." Mom snorted a sharp little laugh and waved her hand like it was nothing. My stomach dropped. The table went quiet for a beat. Then Jackson muttered something about flights, and the chatter picked back up. No one looked at me. No one cared. I stood there, spatula still in hand, heat creeping up my neck. After all I'd done, years of fixing their messes, working overtime to pay their bills when Dad got laid off, babysitting so my siblings could live their lives. They didn't even see me as family. I tossed the spatula onto the grill, grabbed my jacket from the porch, and walked out. Grace called after me, "Avery, you okay?" But I didn't stop. The screen door slammed behind me, and I was gone, boots crunching gravel to my truck. I drove to my apartment, a cramped one-bedroom littered with reminders of them. Tools from helping Dad rebuild the garage, a toy doll one of Grace's girls left behind. I sank onto the couch, staring at the wall. 32 years old, and I'd given up everything. College, travel, a life for them. And I got that in return? A nobody. A babysitter. The anger boiled up, hot and fast, but underneath it was something else. Tiredness, bone deep. I couldn't do it anymore. I thought of Hawaii, the beaches I'd never see, and then of a place I'd always wanted to go, a coastal city a few hours away. All docks and waves and freedom. I'd driven through once, years back, and it stuck with me. No one needed me there. No one knew me. That was the point. I didn't sleep. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started packing. Jeans, a few shirts, my old work boots. No plan, just motion. I grabbed my savings, a thin stack of cash from overtime, and checked the bus schedule on my phone. There was one leaving at 5 a.m. before the sun even thought about rising. I hesitated, thumb hovering over Sophie's number. She was 16, the youngest, the only one who ever seemed to get me. But I didn't call. She'd try to talk me out of it, and I couldn't afford that. Not now. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. I slung the bag over my shoulder, locked the door, and walked to the station. The air was cool, the streets empty, and my chest felt tight, like I was betraying something, but I kept moving. The bus pulled up, a hulking gray thing, and I handed over my ticket. The driver didn't ask questions. I took a seat near the back by the window and watched my town shrink away as we rolled out. Gas station, hardware store, the house I'd grown up in. All fading into the dark. I leaned my head against the glass, jaw clenched. They'd figure out I was gone eventually, when they needed someone to wipe noses or pack lunches. Dad's words echoed, You're not part of us. Fine. If I wasn't part of them, I'd be part of something else. Something mine. The bus rumbled on, carrying me toward a city I barely knew, and for the first time in years, I felt awake. Scared, yeah, but awake. I didn't look back. The bus jolted to a stop just as the sun peeked over the horizon, and I stepped off into the coastal city. My boots hit the pavement, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and I stood there squinting at the sprawl of it. Docks stretching out to the water, cranes looming like giants, horns blaring from boats I couldn't see. It was loud, alive, nothing like the quiet trap I'd left behind. I had no idea where to start, but that was the point. No one here knew me as the girl who fixed everything. I was just Avery, and I'd figure it out. I found a room to rent that first day, a shoebox above a bar that shook with bass every night. The landlord, a guy with a beard like steel wool, didn't care about references, just took my cash and handed me a key. It wasn't much, a mattress, a sink, a window with a view of rusted fire escapes. But it was mine. I dropped my bag, sat on the bed, and let the weight of what I'd done sink in. I'd walked away. No goodbye, no note. They'd be waking up soon, probably still clueless, and I wondered how long it would take them to notice. My phone stayed silent. No missed calls, no frantic texts, just the quiet hum of a city that didn't know my name. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of 32 years of being the reliable one, the fixer sliding off my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to be anyone's safety net. It terrified me. It freed me. The coastal city smelled like salt and diesel. I spent my first morning walking the boardwalk, watching fishing boats come in with their catches. The sea stretched out forever, nothing like the landlocked town I'd left behind. By noon, I was sitting in a cafe called The Lighthouse, asking for a job. Experience? The manager, Marlene, was a woman with silver hair cropped short and eyes that missed nothing. I can cook, clean, serve, whatever you need. I didn't mention that I'd been doing all three since I was 12. She hired me on the spot. We're short-handed. Start tomorrow, 6 a.m. That night, I lay awake in my rented room, listening to the thump of music from the bar below, wondering if anyone had noticed I was gone yet. My phone showed no calls, just a text from Sophie. "Where are you?" Mom's asking. I turned it off without answering. The lighthouse was busy from open to close. I learned the rhythm quickly. Coffee orders shouted over the hiss of the espresso machine, plates balanced up my arm, the constant movement. It was exhausting, but different. No one here expected me to solve their problems. "You're quick," said a voice on my third day. A guy about my age with dark curly hair was working the register. "I'm Nolan." "Avery," I replied, surprised at how strange my name sounded in my own mouth, like I was introducing someone new. Nolan showed me the shortcuts, which tables tipped well, how to handle the temperamental coffee machine. He didn't ask questions about where I came from or why I was here, and I was grateful for that. After 2 weeks, I had enough money to buy a second-hand phone. I kept my old one turned off in my drawer, a relic from a life I was trying to leave behind. The new one felt clean, empty of expectations. "Some of us are heading to the pier tonight," Nolan said one Friday as we closed up. "Live music, you should come." I almost said no out of habit. I was always the one who stayed behind, who made sure everyone got home safe. But there was no one to look after here. "Sure," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. The pier was crowded, string lights crisscrossing overhead, a band playing something with a beat that made my shoulders loosen. Nolan handed me a beer and we stood at the railing, watching the waves catch moonlight. "So what's your story?" he finally asked. I took a long sip. "Just needed a change." He nodded like that was enough. "I get that. Came here 3 years ago after my dad died. Couldn't stand being in our house anymore." Something about the way he said it, matter of fact, no pity, made me want to tell him more. "My family's taking a trip to Hawaii without me. They told me I wasn't part of them." The words hung in the air, and I waited for the questions, the awkward sympathy. Instead, Nolan clinked his bottle against mine. "Their loss," he said simply. I laughed, a real laugh that surprised me. Yeah, their loss. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I might belong here. Not as someone's helper or fixer, but as just Avery. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Work at the lighthouse, evenings exploring the city, sometimes with Nolan, sometimes alone. I found a farmer's market that reminded me of home, but I didn't feel the ache I expected. Instead, I bought fresh bread and sat by the harbor, watching seagulls dive. My old phone stayed off, but sometimes I'd hold it, thumb hovering over the power button, wondering what messages waited. I never pressed it. "You're different," Marlene said one morning as I prepped the kitchen. "When you started, you looked over your shoulder all the time. Now you're here." I nodded, understanding what she meant. I was present in a way I'd never been before, not split between what everyone needed from me and what I wanted. "I like it here," I said simply. That night, Nolan invited me to dinner at his apartment. Nothing fancy, pasta and cheap wine, but sitting across from him, laughing about a customer who'd ordered 8 espresso shots, I realized I was happy. Not the temporary kind that came from solving someone else's problem, but something deeper. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against it, the sound clear and bright in the small space. To new beginnings. 3 months into my new life, my old phone rang. I'd finally turned it on, ready to face whatever waited. The screen lit up immediately. Sophie's name flashing. I answered, heart pounding. "Hello?" "Avery?" Her voice was small, tight. "Where are you? We've been looking everywhere." I sat on my bed, the window open to the sounds of the harbor. I needed to leave. "But you didn't say anything. Dad filed a missing person report. Mom's been crying. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought something happened to you." Guilt twisted in my stomach. I'd never considered they'd worry like that. In my mind, they'd just be annoyed at the inconvenience of my absence. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I should have told you I was safe." "Why did you go?" she asked, and I could picture her, sitting on her bed, knees pulled up to her chest, the way she always did when upset. I closed my eyes. "At Mom and Dad's anniversary. Dad said I wasn't part of the family, that I should stay behind while you all went to Hawaii. He was drunk, Avery. He didn't mean it." "He did." My voice was steadier than I expected. "And no one said anything. No one stood up for me." Silence stretched between us. Then, "I should have. I'm sorry." I hadn't expected that. "It's not your fault. You're 16. Where are you now? Are you okay?" I told her about the coastal city, the lighthouse, even a little about Nolan. It felt good to share, like building a bridge between my old life and new. "You sound different," she said finally. "Happier." "I am." The realization settled over me, true and solid. "They want you to come home, you know. Mom keeps your room ready." I stared out at the harbor, boats bobbing on the water. "I can't go back to how things were." "I know." She paused. "But maybe you could visit? Just to let them know you're okay?" The thought of facing them made my chest tight. But Sophie deserved better than what I'd done, disappearing without a word. "I'll think about it," I promised. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, watching the sun set over the water. The call had shaken something loose in me. Not regret, exactly, but awareness. I'd run away to find myself, but I couldn't erase my past completely. I told Nolan about it that night as we walked along the boardwalk, street lamps casting pools of light on the wooden planks. "Are you going to go?" he asked, hands in his pockets. "I don't know. Part of me wants to show them I'm fine without them. That I built something here." I gestured vaguely at the city around us. "But another part is still hurt," he finished. I nodded, and angry, and confused about why it took me leaving for them to care. He was quiet for a moment. "When my dad died, I ran too. Thought I could outrun the grief. He looked out at the dark water. But eventually I had to go back, face what was left. Not for them, for me. We stopped at the end of the pier, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of salt and distant rain. What if I go back and nothing's changed? I asked. What if they still see me as just convenient? Nolan turned to face me, his expression serious in the dim light. Then you come back here, but at least you'll know. I nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. I'd spent my life fixing other people's problems. Maybe it was time to face my own. That night I called Sophie back. I'll come, I said, just for a weekend. Her exhale of relief was audible. Really? When? Next month. I need to request time off. I paused. But Sophie, I'm not staying. I have a life here now. I understand, she said, and I believed she did. After we hung up, I stood at my window, looking out at the city that had become my refuge. The thought of going back filled me with dread, but also a strange sense of purpose. I wasn't the same person who had fled in the night. I was stronger now, with boundaries and a voice. Whatever waited for me at home, I could face it. And then I would return here, to the life I was building, to Nolan, to the person I was becoming. The decision made, I felt lighter. I would go back, but on my terms. Not as the fixer, the reliable one, the safety net, but as Avery, just Avery who deserved to be seen. The bus ride back felt longer than when I'd left. 5 hours stretched into eternity as familiar landmarks appeared, the gas station where I'd bought coffee every morning, the high school where I'd picked up Sophie countless times, the grocery store where I knew every aisle. My stomach knotted tighter with each mile. Nolan had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. Sophie was waiting at the station, bouncing on her toes. She'd grown taller in the months I'd been gone, her hair cut short in a way that suited her. When she saw me, her face lit up and she ran, colliding with me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. "You're really here," she whispered against my shoulder. "I'm really here," I confirmed, holding her tight. She pulled back, studying my face. "You look different." Good different or bad different? Just different. More you. We drove in her car, she had her license now, another change I'd missed, toward the house I'd grown up in. She filled the silence with updates. Dad had cut back on drinking after I left. Mom had started therapy. They'd postponed the Hawaii trip. "They didn't go?" I asked, surprised. Sophie shook her head. "Mom said it wouldn't be right without you." I didn't know what to do with that information, so I stared out the window at the familiar streets passing by. The house looked exactly the same. White siding, blue shutters, the maple tree in the front yard starting to turn orange with fall. I stood on the sidewalk, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, feeling like an intruder in my own past. Mom opened the door before we reached it. She looked older, tired around the eyes. When she saw me, her hand flew to her mouth. "Avery," she breathed, and then she was hugging me, her familiar perfume enveloping me. "Oh, Avery." Dad appeared behind her, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. His eyes met mine over Mom's shoulder, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Dinner was a strange affair. We sat at the table where I'd served countless meals, but now Mom had cooked. The conversation was stilted, careful. They asked about my job, my apartment. I answered politely, but briefly, maintaining the distance I needed. "We missed you," Mom said finally, setting down her fork. "When you left," she stopped, composing herself. "We didn't realize how much we depended on you, how unfair that was." Dad cleared his throat. "I said things I shouldn't have. At the anniversary dinner." His voice was gruff, uncomfortable. "I was wrong." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had shaped so much of my life with his presence and his absence. "You said I wasn't part of this family." He flinched. "I was drunk and wrong." "But you thought it," I pressed. "You all did. I was the reliable one, the fixer, but never really one of you." Sophie reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it. "We took you for granted," Mom admitted, tears in her eyes. "It was easier than acknowledging how much we needed you, how much we still do." I shook my head. I can't be that person anymore. I won't be. "We don't want you to be," Dad said, surprising me. "We want you to be our daughter, our sister." He gestured to Sophie. "Not our caretaker." I didn't know if I believed him, but the effort meant something. That night, in my old room, preserved exactly as I'd left it, I called Nolan. "How's it going?" he asked. "Strange," I admitted. "They're trying. I don't know if it's enough." "Enough for what?" I thought about it. Enough to change how I see them, how I see myself with them. "Give it time," he suggested. "You didn't figure yourself out overnight either." The weekend passed in a blur of awkward conversations and genuine moments. Mom showed me her therapy journal. Dad took me fishing like when I was little. Sophie and I stayed up late talking about her plans for college, her dreams. They were trying to see me, really see me, maybe for the first time. On Sunday morning, as I packed my bag, Dad knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked, more hesitant than I'd ever seen him. I nodded, sitting on the edge of my bed. He sat beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. "I've been a poor excuse for a father," he said bluntly. "To all of you, but especially to you. I put too much on your shoulders because it was easier than carrying it myself." I stayed silent, letting him speak. "I'm not asking you to come back. You've built something for yourself, and I'm proud of you for that." His voice caught. "But I'm asking for a chance to be better, to be the father you deserved all along." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating figure of my childhood, but a flawed man trying to make amends. "I need time," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to try." Relief flooded his face. He nodded, patting my hand awkwardly before standing. "That's all I can ask for." At the bus station, my family gathered to see me off. Mom hugged me tight, slipping a letter into my hand. "For when you're ready," she whispered. Sophie's eyes were bright with tears. "You'll come back, right? Not forever, but to visit?" "I will," I promised, and meant it. Dad stood back, respecting my space, but nodded to me. "Safe travels, Avery." As the bus pulled away, I watched them grow smaller through the window. 3 figures waving, a family I was connected to, but no longer defined by. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not completely, but enough to breathe deeply. I opened Mom's letter, reading her careful handwriting. "Avery, I'm sorry it took losing you to realize what we had. We're learning to stand on our own now. When you visit next, it will be because we want you here, not because we need you to fix us. We love you. Mom." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my pocket. The bus headed west, back toward the coast, back toward Nolan and the lighthouse and the life I was building. But something had shifted. The anger that had driven me away had softened into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. I wasn't running away anymore. I was moving forward with the freedom to define my own path and the strength to face what lay behind me. Nolan was waiting at the bus station when I returned, leaning against his beat-up car with 2 coffee cups. The sight of him, familiar now in a way that still surprised me, made something in my chest loosen. "Welcome back," he said, handing me a cup. "How was it?" I took a sip, buying time to find the right words. "Complicated. Better than I expected. Harder, too." He nodded, taking my bag and tossing it in the back seat. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said. "Right now, I just want to see the ocean." We drove to our spot on the cliffs, where the highway curved and there was a small turnout overlooking the water. The Pacific stretched out before us, vast and unchanging, waves crashing against the rocks below. I breathed in the salt air, letting it wash away the lingering tension of the weekend. I missed this, I admitted. The whole time I was there, I kept thinking about being here. Nolan smiled. The ocean has that effect on people. It's not just the ocean. I turned to look at him. It's this life. My life. His eyes softened. I'm glad you came back. Me too. The next morning, I returned to the lighthouse, slipping back into the rhythm of orders and coffee and the regular customers who greeted me with genuine smiles. Marlene watched me closely. You seem steadier, she observed during a lull. Trip home do you good? I considered the question. It helped me realize this is home now, but that doesn't mean I have to cut everything else out. She nodded approvingly. Balance, hardest damn thing to find in this life. Over the next few months, I worked on that balance. I called Sophie weekly. I sent Mom recipes I thought she'd like. Dad and I exchanged awkward but increasingly comfortable emails about fishing spots and weather. They were small connections, but they were on my terms. Meanwhile, my life at the coast expanded. I enrolled in community college classes, photography and business management. I joined Nolan and his friends for weekend hikes along the coastal trails. I started saving for a better apartment, one with a view of the harbor. You should display these somewhere, Nolan said one evening, flipping through my growing collection of photographs. Sunrise over the water, fishing boats returning to harbor, the weathered faces of the old men who played chess in the park. They're just for me, I said, but I was pleased by his interest. The cafe has that empty wall, he suggested. Marlene's been talking about local artists. The idea took root. A week later, my photos hung in a neat row along the lighthouse's back wall. Customers commented on them, sometimes even asked if they were for sale. It was a strange feeling, having something I created valued by others, not because it served them, but because it moved them. 6 months after my visit home, Sophie called with news. Mom and Dad are coming to see you, she announced without preamble. For your birthday next month, if that's okay? My birthday. I'd almost forgotten. In our family, birthdays had always been modest affairs. A cake, maybe a small gift. Mine often passed with minimal acknowledgement, especially as I got older. They want to celebrate with you, Sophie continued when I didn't respond. But they said to ask first. They don't want to intrude. The fact that they asked, that they recognized my space as something to respect, meant more than I expected. Yes, I said finally. They can come. Preparing for their visit stirred a mix of emotions. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, bought new sheets for the pull-out couch, stocked the fridge with Dad's favorite beer and Mom's preferred tea. Nolan watched my nervous energy with amusement. They're going to love it, he assured me, because it's yours. The day they arrived, I met them at the same bus station where I'd returned months before. They looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the figures who had dominated my childhood. Mom hugged me tight. Dad shook my hand and then, awkwardly, pulled me into a brief hug as well. This is quite a town you've found, Mom said as we drove through the coastal streets. It suits you. I gave them the tour, the lighthouse where Marlene greeted them warmly, the boardwalk where we ate fish and chips, the cliffs where we watched the sunset. They asked questions about my life, actually listened to the answers, and didn't once ask when I was coming home. That evening, I introduced them to Nolan over dinner at my apartment. I'd been nervous about the meeting, but Nolan's easy charm and my parents' genuine effort to connect made it smoother than I'd feared. After dinner, Dad helped me wash dishes while Mom and Nolan chatted on the small balcony. You've built a good life here, Dad said quietly, handing me a plate to dry. I have. He nodded, eyes on the soapy water. I want you to know, we're doing better too. Your mother and I, we're talking more. I'm working on myself. He glanced at me. I don't expect that to change anything for you. I just wanted you to know. I felt a complicated warmth spread through my chest. I'm glad, Dad. On my birthday, they took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. Nolan joined us, along with Marlene and a few friends from work. It was the first birthday I could remember where I wasn't worried about making sure everyone else was having a good time. After cake, Mom handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a lighthouse on a chain. "To remind you that you guide yourself now," she said, eyes bright with unshed tears. "But you'll always have a light to follow home, wherever home may be." I let her fasten it around my neck, the metal cool against my skin. Later, walking along the moonlit beach with Nolan, my parents' hotel lights visible in the distance, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. "Happy?" Nolan asked, his hand warm in mine. I thought about the word, so simple yet so elusive for so much of my life. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." "Good." He squeezed my hand. "You deserve it." We stopped to watch the waves, the lighthouse beam sweeping across the water in steady, dependable arcs. I touched the pendant at my throat, thinking about lights and guidance and the different meanings of home. I had left to find myself, to escape a family that couldn't see me. What I'd found instead was the strength to be seen. By them, by Nolan, by myself. Not perfect, not fixed, but whole in a way I'd never been before. The ocean stretched before me, vast with possibility, while behind me the lights of the town glowed warm with promise. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel torn between responsibilities and desires. I could stand in this moment, balanced between past and future, and simply be.